The Game Schooler Podcast is a weekly audio show that educates new and experienced gamers about the awesomeness of tabletop gaming. In this week's episode, we'll cover Comic Hunters, our game of the week, interview designer Danielle Reynolds in the School of Gaming, and wrap it up by revealing our high five worker placement types. Welcome to the Game Schooler Podcast. I'm your host, Doug Kotecki, along with my co-host, the esteemed Dr. Michael McCabe. How's it going?
What's going on, Doug? How are you?
I'm pretty good. Not too much to follow up this week. I got a little bit, but a little bit more awesomeness in gaming. How about you?
So, same. Why don't you lead us into the follow-up segment? We'll see where it goes.
All right. Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to thank Court from Cosmos for chatting with us last week. We did a publisher spotlight with her, and go give that a listen to hear about some of the awesome games that are coming up from Cosmos. She did a great job highlighting some of the games that we saw at the convention, and I think it's a real cool segment that we do where publishers get an opportunity to kind of tell you what's new, what's going on with them in a way that's better than you and I could do, right?
Yeah, and our follow-ups are daisy-chained. So I'd like to second the thank you to Court for showing up and really giving a great, almost like we were at a convention, right? And I think what I realized, we waited in line for 2 games at Gen Con.
Yeah.
One was The Gang, which we talked about last week. The other one is Comic Hunters, which is our game of the week this week. So I just thought that was interesting. The 2 games that we actually waited in line for were covering as games of the week. I don't think there's a whole lot of accident there. So
no, and hopefully that's not hopefully we don't fall into that Kickstarter trap of I spent $500 on a Kickstarter, so I'm going to tell you why it's good, even if it's not. These games are actually good.
Well, speaking of, do we want to go into our awesomeness?
I've got one more follow-up.
Go ahead. But hold on to that Kickstarter thought, because I'll come back to that in just a moment.
I want to put it out there that I don't reply as much as I probably should, but I do love seeing what other people are playing in the Discord server. So it's always nice to kind of log in there and see, oh, I got this to the table, I got that to the table, and just the variety, which is really cool to see. So know that I see it, although I don't reply as much as I should.
Yeah, it's an awesome community. Believe it or not, Doug, that community exists without us. That is the sign of a community, right?
Yeah.
When the school can function without a principal or teacher there, that's when you know you have an actual school. And that Discord community is doing a great job. There's so many amazing people welcoming new members in and also just leading the conversations and the excitement. It's just so welcoming. There's nothing for us to police there because the community just takes care of each other. It's awesome. Glad you brought that up.
Which is also one of the things that I do have, which is in something awesome in gaming, and that is Game Schoolers helping Game Schoolers.
Yeah.
So a new member jumped in there and asked for some advice on a program that they're setting up at their school. And, our folks just helped out quite a bit right there, giving a whole bunch of suggestions, and that was really cool to see.
It's awesome. Yeah, that is awesome.
All right, tell me about some Kickstarter.
Well, quite the day in the McCabe household. It just came in, so I'm going to forgive the noise. You might need to edit some of this out.
I will not. Visual aids, so watch the YouTube video if you haven't. Something deluxe. What do we got?
Andromeda's Edge.
Oh, Michael's excited about that.
Oh, so excited. Doug, I actually fell into the trap of watching every single post that came out on Board Game Geek, and the problem with that is sometimes you'll get a very vocal group of like 2 or 3 humans that just trash a game, because maybe something didn't go perfectly out of the thousands of games that got fulfilled.
Yeah.
And I was really nervous, so I just cracked it open, wanted to make sure that it was in there because I was worried about some of the things I'm seeing on Board Game Geek, like the premium dice trays might be this, might be that. The colors on the dice trays don't look like a prototype. And then I open it up, and sitting right there is this beautiful little neoprene dice tray that exceeds my expectations. And I see this little foam tray filled with wooden bits and sleeves to match the size, so I don't have to do that work. I don't know if you could see that because I can't see me, and right away I was just, excited. You shared about this when your big batch of Marvel was that Into the Multiverse delivered a few weeks back.
Yeah. Yep.
And so the last week since this started fulfilling, I've been checking the door 5-6 times a day. Anytime the dog goes over the door, like, ooh, is that Andromeda's Edge? Ooh, is that Andromeda's Edge? Oh, is that Andromeda's Edge? Oh no, somebody's just watering their lawn. And even sharing with my family very openly, and they're like, Dad, why are you so excited about a game? Games get delivered to the house all the time. Not a game like this. It re-implements Dwellings of Elderville. I can't wait. It has a space theme that I think other people may want to play with me. I might not have to just play it solo. Yeah, I'm like really excited about it. And so I just want to thank Luke Laurie, Maximus Laurie, and Peter Vaughn, and everybody at Cardboard Alchemy. I haven't played it. I don't know if the game is going to be a 10 or a 4 on Board Game Geek. I'm just excited. So, that's what's awesome for me. It is nice to get that excitement every once in a while. I feel like if I was draining my wallet on a weekly basis, that would be a different type of panic and fear. And so it's nice to just have this excitement annually, semi-annually.
Yeah, you're like Bath and Body Works, semi-annual excitement.
Yeah.
As far as one more thing before we get onto the spotlight for this week, that was awesome for me is I was playing a game with my 2 youngest children, and I don't want to spoil the game because I think we'll be talking about it in the future, but it had a real-time component to it, and to see the intensity that my 9-year-old attacked this game as if we were doing brain surgery. And that kind of engagement, right? To be able to see that and present something where it was really life or death is what it felt like. It was pins and needles. Are we going to do this in time? Let's go, Dad. Keep it moving. We got to do this, guys. And that level of immersion and engagement that is something that I don't see a lot out of kids in general. But to see that in this experience was really cool. And it's awesome when you see that happen live and in person.
Yeah. Why don't you say the game? Even if we're going to talk about it, it's not a spoiler, or is it a spoiler?
Yeah. No, I'll leave a teaser.
Okay.
We're gonna talk about a game that made my kid very excited at some point, and you'll just have to wait to hear about it later. Now, do you have anything else that's awesome before we?
Yeah, I'm being crushed. I have a fear of missing out on not knowing what that game is. What if I forget to ask you offline later on? The only thing that I have to say is that we have been very fortunate. Today's School of Gaming segment is another example of that. We've been very fortunate to just have some awesome people come on the show for interviews. And, back in episode 104, we had Phil Walker Harding. Within the last 3 or 4 months, we had Keith Mateka from Thunderworks, and we've had Mike DeLisio on from the Dice Tower fame. And it's because of listeners like you that listen to the show and follow along. And so we've just been very fortunate to have some great interviews. I'll give a teaser of my own. We have a couple more that are lined up and coming. The one thing that I'll say, some of them are in games that we haven't played yet. There's a role-playing universe where we're looking at bringing on a person who's created a role-playing universe based on the Revolutionary War. Really excited about that. And some others that, hey, I don't want to talk about it until it happens. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there's potentially some big-time people in the industry coming on the show, and it's thanks to
Milton
to
and
you guys.
Bradley.
Yeah, there you go. You're able to track both of them down at the same time, huh?
Both Parker brothers are going to be on the show next week. No, that's cool. That's exciting, and look forward to some of the stuff that we get to share with you guys as we move forward. Spotlight. Michael and I are kind of trading back and forth, talking about games that maybe the other person either doesn't care for as much or maybe hasn't even played it or things like that. And this week, I wanted to talk about a game that I think I'd briefly mentioned at one point in the past, more along the lines of, hey, I played this with my kids and we enjoyed it type of thing. And that is Flashback Zombie Kidz. So we had talked about Zombie Kidz as a cooperative game from Yellow quite
Episode
a while
44.
ago. Episode 44. And Flashback Zombie Kidz is in the same universe, but a different style game. It was published in 2022 by Scorpion Masqué and Hachette. The designers are Baptiste Derez and Marc-Antoine Doyen. The artist is Laura de Chateauberg, Jennifer Matee, and Michael Verdu. 1 to 4 players, 30 minutes. It is a kids game. Hey, I did pretty good on that, Michael. There's no reason to be smirking. Flashback Zombie Kidz, it's a cooperative investigation game using pictures in a world frozen in time. And you are going to discover the whole story bit by bit through the eyes of the characters living in it. And basically, there are cards with numbers on them, and those numbers are above characters. So Michael may be on the card, and there's a 5 above him. Well, if I flip over card 5, I'm going to see exactly what Michael is seeing. So the same scene, just from Michael's point of view. And there might be a number above a dog that's walking through the park. And if you flip over his number card, you're going to see what the dog sees. So by seeing all these different points of views, you are discovering clues and uncovering the mystery of what's going on, and you have to answer some questions. You're going to explore the past to solve some mysteries in the present, change the future, save the world from horrible monsters. It plays over 3 scenarios, and then there's kind of a final 4th scenario.
So, real quick, what are you doing on your turn?
It's a cooperative game, so it's almost like a little bit of an escape room style thing, except nothing is really off limits. It's just, okay, I see it from Doug's point of view. Now I want to look at the card that shows it from Michael's point of view. And then when you kind of cross-reference those, you see, oh, somebody else spilled that paint can.
Cool.
And then you're able to kind of jump around and see different things. There might be a camera, like a security camera up in the corner. So you can look at that number, pull that card out of the deck, and it's like, now you see what the security camera sees. And so you kind of triangulate and cross-reference everything to try and puzzle out what the story is to answer a couple questions at the end of the round. The cool thing is that after each scenario, you are unlocking a new component for the game. And it's a new way to solve puzzles, a new, I don't want to give any spoilers, but just new apparatus for the game. And it is done really well. The unlockable elements really impressed me with this game, and that's not something that I throw a lot around lightly. I'm a hard guy to impress, and these, I was like, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Now, I played this one time through, and I played it with my daughter, who at the time was 8, and she had a blast. And I think that this is a great game for one kid with an adult. The experience that I had, I would recommend wholeheartedly. Cool. I know that if I had some of my other kids in there, there would be a little bit more pushing and pulling on, I want to look at that card. Let me look at that card. Whose turn is it to look at the next card? Ooh, I saw that. I get to look at it. And a little bit of that fighting, where in this case, where it was just one-on-one, me with my daughter, she got to have all the glory. And I got to hunt the cards, and we didn't have to worry about who was looking at what. We could work together. And it was one of those where I sat down to try the game, and we played through the whole thing in one sitting. Awesome. It was like, I want to play again. The game promoted curiosity, and it had like mind-blowing moments for my daughter, where it was like, oh my gosh, can you believe that is that, and this is that. Like, now this is also the same daughter that got really excited about the game I talked about earlier. But she was so invested and like we got to do let's go to the next one. I got to find out what happens to the story. And so it's a great game to see learning and the deduction in action, like happening in front of you, where you can see those gears turning and it's like, I think this may be connected to that. And you can kind of step back as a parent and just be like, I don't know, let's see, let's check it out, and kind of guide them through. And it was just a really cool one-on-one bonding experience, I think, for the both of us to have that. And like I said, I don't know how it plays with more players, but if you're looking for kind of a, in my house anyway, we have some kids that are super active in activities and seem to get a lot of attention with car rides and people like, I got to take this one over here and this one over there. And sometimes you kind of have that feeling like, I really need to spend some time with this one. This was a great game for that experience to feel like, all right, we're going to have some one-on-one time. Yeah. So,
and did you plan it, or you just kind of fell into it, right? You wanted to see the game and you called the kid over and then all of a sudden it developed into that, or was it more intentional than that?
No, I think it was, a game that we picked up from Gen Con last year. They've since released a newer version that I think might be a little bit higher up on the age range, but more on the scary element, not anything of like gory or off color or anything like that. So it was something that we picked up from Gen Con last year, and it was like, this has been on the shelf for a while. I want to give it a try, and I knew that she was the one I would be a good one to try it out with. She was the right age at the right time, and I was not planning on playing all 4 scenarios that afternoon. It was like, let's, because sometimes you play stuff and it's like, this could be hot garbage, and we'll move on and, go play with your sister and do whatever you want.
That's Doug's default. This is likely going to be hot garbage and we'll move on, but I'll give it a try anyway.
Yeah, if not, we might have a fun time. And we did have a fun time. It was an awesome way to spend an afternoon.
Well, you said you burned through the whole game in a single day, right?
Yes.
Oh, awesome.
Yes. Yeah, so that each scenario is 30 minutes. We did all 4 of them for a full 2-hour game session.
That's incredible. So the engagement must have been through the roof for both the child and adult, huh?
Yeah, and I like I said, I think with more players that might be split, and I don't know if you'd have that level of investment. That special one-on-one time, which I think we've talked about a little bit in the past, but I don't think it's talked about as much with either game schooling or family gaming and kids gaming. It's often like, well, how can I get my kids to the table? But kind of having a more than a 10-minute engaging one-on-one experience is not something that gets talked about a lot.
Yeah, that's excellent. And Zombie Kidz just has a way of hooking you back in, getting to that next mission. And the base game I'm referring to, and it sounds like...
Well, you've been playing that recently, right?
I have, with my 8-year-old. And, we'll play 3 or 4 of them right at once. And she's at the point now where she just wants to complete those last few that are remaining in the book. We have to beat it with 6. We haven't done this one. We haven't beaten it with just 6 zombies. We've got, I was like, well, in order for that to happen, we're going to have to roll 4 blanks at some point in time throughout the game, or we're going to have to do this or that. But a kid doesn't want to hear that. They just want to keep rolling the dice and knocking it out. So we have, and incredible.
They don't want to know the solution before the game starts?
No, they don't. No.
Oh, okay.
Not that type of 8-year-old. So it is a fun game, one that we've come back to, and one that basically what I'm trying to say, dear listeners, the experience that Doug has had with his kiddo, I've been fortunate to have with each of my children with that game. We've had the base game of Zombie Kidz long enough that when my oldest was 8 or 9, we were playing that individually, and then middle child had that. Middle child was actually on the episode with Doug's kiddo, and now having it with youngest child. And I think that's the really cool thing about that Zombie Kidz experience. There's a right time and place for that game. Yeah, they are, and the artwork is so good that just doesn't it feels like the perfect branch between your kids don't feel like they're playing a kid's game because of the artwork, and the adult doesn't feel like they're playing a kid's game because of the artwork. But it works. It works in that in-between zone in the best possible way, I think, where it's like, well, I'm playing a real game here. This is not Operation or something. This
has the art of a solid game. And I think it's one that, you should try out with your youngest, because I think you're probably at the right spot for it.
You're talking to me directly now?
Yes, directly you.
Yeah, okay. I was
anybody
thinking,
with the youngest child out there, try it out.
That's a pretty broad statement of endorsement, Doug.
Anything
else?
If you have a youngest child, which means you have more than one, play with the youngest.
It looks like it's still readily available. I mean, I'm seeing it for around $20 at Amazon and Noble Knight and Hachette Board Games USA, and Miniature Market has it higher than that. But so lots of stores, and probably still available at many friendly local game stores as well, huh?
Yep. So that is our spotlight for this week, Flashback Zombie Kidz. We've talked about a bunch in the Discord, or talked about the Discord a bunch in this episode. You can sign up for that by going to gameschooler.com/Discord. Continue to spread the word about the podcast if you haven't already. Leave a review, preferably a 5-star one on whatever platform you're listening to us on. And if you have any questions or comments, reach out to us, email at gameschooler.com. Now let's move on to the game of the week.
The game of the week. The game of the week is an in-depth look at a family-friendly game we think you should try if you get the chance. This week's game is Comic Hunters, designed by Robert Colo and published in the United States by Arcane Wonders and Spin Masters. Doug, give us the stats.
Yeah, published in 2020, originally in Brazil. It has now been released in North America in 2024. The art is by Diego Sá. 2 to 4 players, 60 minutes. Board Game Geek, or the cover here says 14 plus. Board Game Geek says 10 plus, and I think 10 plus is probably about right. And this is going to qualify as a family game for us. After a long search in several comic book stores and online stores, you managed to acquire the most important comic books of all your favorite heroes. Well, almost all of them. Some rare and important editions are still missing from your collection. Comic Hunters is divided into 3 rounds, and in each round, players will visit 3 of the 4 locations where they can purchase comic book cards. So there are 4 locations that you can go to, only 3 available in each of the 3 rounds. The first one is a comic book store, which is going to feature the most recent comics. And this, you acquire cards by a simultaneous pass and draft. So you're going to pick up 4 cards, take one, pass them to your left. Everybody's going to do that until you have 4 cards. Then there is a flea market. The flea market features comics from the 80s and 90s. There are going to be rows equal to the number of players. And on your turn, you can either add a card to a row or pass and take one of the rows. A row can only hold 4 cards. So if you take a card early or take a row early, you're then leaving that open for your opponents to fill up their rows and take that. But you may get the best card that you want.
You might need that.
The next place to acquire comics is the auction website, which you are going to bid for the older comics published in the 60s or 70s. One lot will have 5 cards available, and one lot will have 3 cards available. And the remaining lots, based on the number of players, there's going to be a lot for each player, will have 4 cards. So there's always going to be one lot with 5, one with 3, and if you're playing with 4 players, for example, there are going to be 2 lots with 4 cards. Players are going to initiate a bid on one of the lots. They're going to be using their secret stash points. Players are going to start the game with 15 secret stash points, and they're going to use those throughout the entire game. It does not increase. When they're gone, they're gone.
And if you don't use it, they're points for you at the end of the game.
Yep, exactly. And the last player left without taking a bid is going to use secret stash points equal to the number of cards that are in that remaining lot. So if there is a lot of 3 left, they're going to pay 3 secret stash points. So you're going to acquire that for the auction website. The last place, which I believe shows up in every round, yes. So the only one that repeats the entire game is the convention. And you are going to be able to collect comics from every age at convention booths. You're going to lay out a 5x5 grid of cards on the table with an empty spot in the middle. So it's going to be 24 cards. And on your turn, you may slide one card through empty orthogonally adjacent spaces. And then you're going to choose a hero and a row or a column and take all of the cards matching that hero in that row or column. You're going to do this 2 times through, so you get 2 times to go to the convention. And as cards start getting taken from the convention booths, you are able to slide that card farther and farther to kind of make some crazy combos as that space widens up in the middle. Once the round is over, you've acquired cards. You're going to place cards onto the table in front of you to start or expand your collections. And the collections are based on heroes. So you can have a collection of Captain America comics, a collection of Iron Man comics, things like that. You need to start a collection with at least 2 cards, but at the end of the game, they're not going to count unless they have at least 3. The new comics that you add to collections are paid for by discarding other comics from your hand. So those recent comics are going to have a value of 1. Those 80s and 90s are going to have a value of 2, and the 60s or 70s are going to have a value of 3. So, for example, I could pay 1 old comic of a value of 3 to play 3 recent comics with a value of 1 down in front of me into a collection. When you add comics to a heroes collection, you're also going to be moving markers on the highlight tracks based on the new card that you played. So each card is going to have little icons on them, and those represent special things such as a number 1 edition, a first appearance of a character, new costume or visuals, special editions, memorable clashes. Each game, you're only going to play with 3 of those. So out of the 5 or 6 that there are, you're going to pick 3 at the beginning of the game to keep track of. Those are going to score points. And the game is going to end after 3 rounds, and you'll earn points based on the size of each hero collection and its desirability. So at the beginning of the game, you're going to take all of the 8, are there 8 heroes in the game? I believe there's 8. Yep, 8 heroes. And you are going to put them on a little grid, kind of determining their value. And based on how many comics of that collection, say how many Iron Man 1 cards I have, I may score, let's see, looking at the book here. You know, if I've got 3 to 4, I might score 3 points. If I get 5 to 7, I'm getting 12 points, something along those lines. So you're going to get points based on that. You're going to get points for variety of collections, so the number of hero card collections you have, as long as it's at least 3 cards. Points for your position on each highlight track. Those highlight tracks are going to reward you who's farthest ahead. So if I have the most, I'm going to get 12 points. If Michael has the second points, he may get 8 points, something like that. And then any leftover secret stash points. The player with the most points is acclaimed as the greatest comic book collector of all time and wins the game. So that is how you play Comic Hunters. Confusing, you kind of always want to say Comic Book Hunters, but the game is Comic Hunters. One of the main things I like about this one is, obviously, if you've listened to the podcast for a while, you know I'm a Marvel fan. And I love the artwork.
A while,
and theme.
meaning like if this is your first, second, or third episode. Yeah.
Yeah. The artwork and theme are really cool in this game. But I want to go a step further in that. Yes, I am a fan of Marvel. But having the licensed comic book covers on the cards really does add an authenticity and a lot to this game. The game would still be cool, and the mechanisms are awesome. But I think having those real covers on the cards makes a big difference. If I just had a comic book that said Flashman and it's like, oh, okay, I'm collecting Flashman, that's great, but there is a real-world connection to this that coincides with the theme and the way that you're acquiring those comics.
Yeah, and I just want to take the other side of that aisle coin street where it doesn't matter for me, and there's still a really cool game in there. So you're getting both ends, both perspectives, I think, are true for this game. For Doug, who is a Marvel fan, maybe fanatic, having the actual comic books and the comic book characters matters. For me, who I like Marvel, but I really just want to play an awesome game. right? If I have an hour, I want to play an awesome game. I love it. And so,
And I think for me, it's the cherry on top. It doesn't make the game. It just makes it a step
that's
up.
awesome.
It just really adds to it.
That's awesome. Go ahead.
Well, I want to make it clear that that's not what's making the game for me. I think it just adds that extra level to it.
Cool.
I think the different acquisition phases are really cool. There's 4 very unique ways to acquire cards that somehow still kind of work thematically. On top of just, okay, we're doing an auction now. Well, no, you're doing an auction and bidding on an quote online site for the rarest comics.
Yeah.
Which is real. The going into a comic book shop is just like, yeah, these are easy to acquire. I can pick up what I want. Like that level that you wouldn't think that these kind of separate methods for acquiring cards would feel thematic.
They're thematically integrated and in every phase. Doug, what happens to when I use some of the comics as currency, I'm going to say, to buy my collection, what happens with the comics that I discard? They immediately go into the convention pile so that others could potentially buy them. They go back into circulation. So there's that currency of the comics that's pretty cool. That I had no idea was really in the game until I played it, and even played it a second or third time where it became very apparent how those phases were thematically integrated.
Yeah. Using the comics to pay for other comics is something I really like in games. There's quite a few games that have done similar things in the past, but just that thing of It's a Wonderful World is another example where it's like, do I use this card for the resource, or am I actually going to try and build this one? And I love getting, at the end of the round, and you're like, do I want to use this in a collection, or am I making this one bigger, or should I actually do this one that's going to help one of the highlights? So do I make my Iron Man collection bigger with this one, even though it's not helping me with highlights, or do I get rid of that because it's a 3? So there's a lot of different cool puzzles to figure out or decisions to make while you're playing the game.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say a few things here, and we'll dance around if that's okay. So I've played this game at 1, 2, and 3, but not 4, and I really enjoyed it at every player count. I enjoyed playing it at 2 and at 3 equally. I had a very similar experience with the game. I think the way that those 4 phases come up and you see 3 out of the 4 phases in 3 rounds, and getting to assemble your collection between rounds and getting the bonuses to pay out, but nothing's really too fiddly. The highlights are different in every game you play, so there's just a ton of variety. And then taking it one step further, there's a lot of games that don't stay in my collection simply because I can't play them with anybody. Yeah. And what I loved about playing it solo, you're playing against Jarvis, so Tony Stark's butler or UI interface. You can get the help me out on some of that, but it's a pretty slick solo system, which I enjoyed playing because you're just trying to prevent Jarvis from getting an awesome collection. And so you're playing all the phases, and Jarvis participates in 3 out of the 4 phases. He doesn't go to the convention. And so just being able to play the game solo and still have a pretty good fun time. Now, granted, that was my experience. If you get out there, others might have a different experience. So I have, for this review, I haven't actually played it at 4. The other thing that I will tell our listeners and people who've been listening all along, that I have 2 other kind of tangents here, and hopefully you can jump in and tie them up nicely and succinctly. I wasn't planning on getting this game. I knew you were going to get it. I knew that you'd actually picked it up prior to going to Gen Con. But when I played the demo, I thought, man, for $25, that game is doing something that I don't have anything else in my collection to do. So I stood in line and picked one up and took it home. The other tangent I've lost, but I will recapture at some point, so I'm going to send it back to you, Doug.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is really interesting about this game is, as we've talked in the past and is becoming more of a kind of a pet peeve for me, is setup, how fast can I get this game to the table, and whether it's fiddly or not. And certainly when you're talking about games that you're going to bring into a school or an after-school program or thing, those are things that are really important. How fast can I get this to the table, taught, and get going? The setup in this game is fairly straightforward. The argument could be made that the in-between round setup can be a little fiddly. However, there's an excitement to that setup each round because I want to know what cards are going to be in the auction. I want to know what cards are going to be at the convention. I want to know when Michael flips over a card to add it to a row when we're doing the flea market. I want to know what it is.
Yeah.
Because you're chasing things, you're collecting different things. And so it's, even though you're setting something up every round to kind of manipulate, all right, this is this type of round, this is this type of round, there is kind of a huddle over the table where everybody's like, oh, what's that card?
What's coming out?
What came out? Ooh. And very much under the surface of like, I don't want to show my hand, but I'm very excited that came out, and I want to get that one.
Which even I think with putting cards back into the convention hall, I'm going to put that back in circulation because when it comes out, I'm going to claim Iron Man and get them all. But you don't want anyone to know that, and so you're just waiting for him to come out of the convention, and hopefully you can get it. And hey, I'm second. There's no way anyone else is going to make that move and manipulate that. And all of a sudden, I'll just take Iron Man out of this row. No.
Yeah, it happens to line up. There's 4 in a row, and you're like, well, that's not lasting.
Why did I put that back in circulation?
Please don't see that. Please don't see that. The other thing I think is really cool is that there are multiple ways to score points, and I don't think that there seems to be a clear, obvious path to victory. I don't think you can spam one
you
area,
can, but it's risky.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like you can try that.
I've had it work. I've also had it not work and been doubled up by people.
Which I think is the proving my point is that there's no clear path. It's not like you sit down and it's like, well, whoever.
I was actually trying to support your point there, Doug. Let's go ahead.
Did
I'll
I
let
say
you go.
prove?
Yeah. Said, go.
Yeah, you proved the point that there isn't a clear path, because you can just say it would ruin the game if you found out that, oh, well, all I have to do is just collect the most of the top superhero and have the biggest collection there, and I'm always going to win. Like, that's not the case. And I appreciate that there's no discernible, because we have played some games where it's like, it seems like that's pretty obvious, like the main thing that you have to do, and if you don't, you're going to get railroaded. And the one game that we played, all 3 people took very different strategies, and it was very close.
Very close, yep.
Did you think about what you had forgotten?
Yeah, no, I did. I thought, okay, 187 episodes in, and we're saying this is a family game. And so kind of my thought, and I'm glad that I wrote down my thought on the run sheet coming into the show so I could actually repeat it out on air, is that first teaching and learning game for me, I'm not going to say it was clunky, but I was very conscious of, okay, I got a demo at Gen Con. Great job with the demo. Nice job Spin Masters running it. I appreciate that. And in getting through just understanding the full phases and how they work and how the game plays together, that second, third, fourth, and fifth game were really smooth. So it's kind of a caveat, but also kind of, I think, where I'm at or we're at or where the hobby's at, that for games that you plan on playing, and I'll put I language on it, for games that I'm going to play more than 3 times in my life, I'm okay with just figuring out. I mean, we actually call it a teaching and learning game. You and I do and refer to that kind of as our part of our nomenclature. Once those phases are figured out, boy, I think it just runs really, really well. So my only thing is, if you're bringing this into your house and you're the one who's really excited, the solo is a great way to learn all of those phases. And then if a suggestion I would make, if you're playing with your family or even your game group, sit that first game out and just be the game master and facilitate it so that everybody else at the table can ask that, because this is not a game where I can sit back and pause, right? I get so engaged and immersed in what I'm doing with my collection that one little question, if my kid across the table asks, well, what do I do now? Huh? because I'm so locked in. There's other hobby games.
I got to use this to pay for
yeah,
that. I got to do that.
Yeah, right. I get into my own algorithm, and I appreciate that about this game. So not very succinct there, but I think there's a ton to this game. I have some appreciation of things I want to get to, but I'll get to that after skills.
Yeah, and there's I think the iconography in this game is really well done.
Fantastic.
Once you kind of get used to it, you're only looking at the left side of a card. The card artwork blends into the background. It's not an important factor of the game whatsoever. The one thing that I have in my notes to kind of be aware of is that the box for this game is not the highest quality, and the tokens are a bit thinner. That when it's been a while since I punched out a game with tokens that were this thin, barely, a little bit thicker than cardboard or cardstock.
Yeah.
However, I will say they are used so sparingly in the game that it doesn't bother me.
Yeah,
While I was
same.
punching it out, I'm thinking, yeah. But in gameplay, it's not like you're using those tokens as currency. They're not going through anybody's hands. They're basically just a marker on the board, and it works. And if that's what it takes to get this price point to $25, which seems crazy to me that is where it's at, I think it's a good sacrifice to make. So just to put that out there, I think it's worth it, but to be aware of it.
Well, and that was my caveat as well but it was couched in appreciation. I'm so glad that this game is available for $25. I'm so glad that people can go to Barnes & Noble or pick it up on Arcane Wonders website. And I'm not trying to get the commodity of hype going. This is a game that has had plenty of it. Here's the connection that I want to make. 6-8 months ago, this thing was multiple hundreds of dollars at Noble Night, right? Because it was an import from Brazil. So the fact that people in the hobby played it and worked together, and whether that's Tom Vassell at the Dice Tower, Mike DeLisio at the Dice Tower, along with Robert at Arcane Wonders, I don't know the inner workings of that. I'm a nerd who follows a lot of shows, but I just want to give appreciation to the people that made this into a $25 game. Is my box already dented on the shelf behind me? Yeah, it is. And will it continue to get dented? Yeah. Are the cards bent a little bit? Yeah, after just a half dozen plays. And you know what? I'm okay with all of that because for me, it's a really fun game, and it's one that I can recommend to people in my neighborhood and not say, oh, yeah, it's 50. No, this is a game I can recommend, and people can go into Barnes & Noble and not think that I'm nuts for recommending a game that has super deluxe components, and it's going to be $89.99. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Normal person down the street or people who I work with who are Marvel fans, I can say, no, this is a great game. You should check this out. So that's the last of my rant before we get into our skills.
All right. What kind of skills you got, Michael?
I have problem solving, and I know that that's a core skill that comes in a lot of games, but figuring out how, and I'll just define it because we haven't done that in several episodes, a game that rewards players for finding solutions to simple or complex problems. Whether you're figuring out how to maneuver in a convention hall to get the 4 Black Panthers to line up to say Black Panther and to build out your little collection of Wakanda beauty in front of you on your tableau, or that issue that I talked about earlier. Well, what am I going to do in this auction here? I'm going second. I don't know. So just figuring out how to solve those little phases in the game to build out your own collection through 3 rounds. It's in there mostly in repeated plays. Second, third time when you sit down and the rule set inside and out, that problem solving is going to be there, especially if you're playing with other people who've played it.
Yeah. One of the things that was in this game that we haven't talked about in a long time and kind of a little bit goes into your problem solving, and that's logistics.
Yes.
Which is a game that allows players to manage production flow between the point of origin and the consumption. And there are moments in this game where you have to tactically think about, I want to get that card because it's valuable and I can use it to pay for other cards that I want, even though I'm not collecting. That kind of workflow of how do I acquire the income for the cards that I do want to play, and shuffling back and forth between, because you could spend the whole round collecting cards that you want in a collection, And of course, there are opportunities where you're going to get cards that you didn't plan on taking. Of course, that's going to happen. But if you go through the whole game thinking, I just need to collect Iron Man cards, but then you don't have a system for how you're going to pay and add those to your collection, you're not going to do very well.
Which I believe Doug is critiquing my initial teaching and learning game of this game, where I just ran to the end of one track and then had a whole collection of twos that didn't score. So great memory, Doug, but that leads me into my next two skills. That's why I intentionally jumped in on you there. I'm going to send it back to you, but that's where I have observation and comprehension. There's a big cutoff that happens that once you have 8 of a certain character in your comic book collection, you're going to jump up to a score factor. And then once you're at 12, you've maxed out. And so, you're going to get 48, 40, or 32 points depending on the rarity of that character. And so Doug made a point there, and it goes into these two skills of I can get really excited, and I'm collecting, but I have to know when to halt on one collection and observe what's going on at the rest of the table, especially in a 2 and 3 player game. Do I really want to compete with Black Panther and Iron Man, or is it time for me to just move on to Thor to get that 8th Thor? Because the 8th Thor could be the difference from 10 points or 20 points. And so being able to observe and comprehend what's going on. Again, these are repeated plays where these skills are going to come up. If you're just playing the game 1 or 2 times and moving on to a different game, you're not going to see these skills. But I feel like in repeated plays and playing this game with kiddos and playing this game with adults, these are skills that come up. Now I'll send it back to you.
Well, there are skills that you'll see, you won't develop them.
Yeah.
So they're going to show up in the game. You're just not going to hone them and get better at them. One of the unique ones I also have that we haven't had in a while is goals, a game in which players have clearly defined victory conditions that they must work towards. The idea that those point totals and what you're going after are set out right from the start of how valuable Captain America comics can be. You know that you're hunting for first editions. You know the points that you can get from variety. I like that in the game. There's the end of the game, you get to a point where people are tallying their scores and kind of figuring that out. Like, that still happens in this game. But there's nothing of like, oh, well, I had this hidden goal card that gives me another 25 points, and I collected this combination of cards, so I get. Those aren't in the game. Everything is kind of very public and open, and it gives you a good idea of, I can see what Michael's going after. I can see what Dan's going after and what I'm collecting, and where I might fit and maximize. So I think it is a good game for teaching some of that observation along with the victory points that you can get and the goals in this game.
Yeah, those are all really, really good points. The only other thing that I want to talk about, can I move on from skills? Is that okay?
Oh, yeah.
One other thing in my notes I wanted to make sure I addressed. We had a question come up in the Discord. I think I threw out a picture when I was playing against Jarvis on a Saturday morning solo adventure of Comic Hunters and just having a blast, and I wanted to share it with people. And a comment came back, is this worth the hype? And I hope that, through this episode, people, because hype is a commodity in the board game world, right? It gets used, games get elevated, people are worried about missing out on a game, so you got to run out and buy it. Well, at a $25 price point, it's at Barnes & Noble, you can safely say at some point this game will be for like $17.50 on some holiday sale at a Barnes & Noble. You could safely say at some point. So keeping all that in mind, I'm really impressed with this game. And I'm really impressed with the price point and what's in there. And I just, as people who play, 150 plus games multiple times in a year, I really hope I continue to get this game played. And I hope that, in my H index, that this is one of those games that a year from now is sitting at like 15 or 16. It's a game that I hope that I'm able to introduce to other family members and game groups. It runs a little long for Board Game Club, I think. Maybe with one other person, and if everything's set up and a 12 or 13-year-old kiddo is coming in and I'm just playing against them one-on-one, maybe. But it does tend to run at 40 or 50 minutes in that 3 to 4 player count. So for me, the best fit is just going to be at home with family and friends any day of the week. This is really high praise for me. Where the game that I thought was hyped, I did. I'll say I was
Sure.
I was more skeptical heading into Comic Hunters, Doug, than I usually am with games. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think for me, it was one that clearly the theme appealed to me. And it's one that, if you ask, do I feel like it lived up to the hype or deserves the hype that it gets? I would say, based on the price and the gameplay, 100%. I almost have kind of the reversed fear that some people that would really enjoy this game won't play it because of the theme, because they're not interested, or they're thinking it's some sort of other. And of course, the cover does a really good job of not over emphasizing or over showing that it's like, this is a Marvel superhero game. It's not. It's a game about collecting comics, and that's depicted on the cover. It's not like Marvel. It doesn't look like a gigantic cash grab type of thing that you might see in Target or Walmart of, there's a new movie coming out, so this is that. So I think it is subdued, but I also hope that doesn't deter people, because I'm always interested in new games that have a different theme. And there are not a bunch of games with this as a theme. And so I applaud the designers for coming up with an awesome theme of comic book hunting, being able to throw a legit license on top of it. And I hope that people give it a try, because as a drafting, auction, and acquisition set collection game, this really stands on its own of what's out there, and so I hope people kind of give it a chance, even if they're thinking like, I'm not really a huge fan of Marvel, thanks, but no thanks. It's a better game than maybe shackling it with that IP you might think of. So give it a try. Anything else on that one, Michael? What are you grinning about?
No, because it was well said, Douglas. You brought it home. Now you're making me analyze your take here. You're spot on. That was good. That was really good.
All right. Well, that is our game of the week from Arcane Wonders and Spin Master, Comic Hunters. Give it a try if you get the chance.
The School of Gaming. In the School of Gaming, we discuss concepts, keywords, etiquette, and helpful ideas in the world of gaming. This week, we have an interview with game designer and industry professional Danielle Reynolds. Danielle, welcome to the Game Schooler podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
No problem. Glad you're here.
Yeah, we're also really excited. We're big fans of your work, and we've talked about your games multiple times on the show. But before we do a deep dive, and I just completely go full fanboy on you here, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the hobby?
Sure. So the abridged version of this, because it's a wonky story, was I showed up to a Comic-Con, C2E2, in 2018, got ditched by my coworkers while cosplaying as Mary Marvel's black suit, and then befriended a Canadian company nice enough to let me sit at their booth because I had high heels on. And as I now know, convention centers are never somewhere to wear high heels because there's nowhere to sit. And so sat down, was offered a fan-made cookie, declined because who knows what was in there. And then this guy was like, hey, you're in my seat. And I was like, I'm so sorry. And he's like, I'm messing with you. I'm Canadian. So we start talking, and it turns out that he was the one in charge of the subscription box called Board Game Bento, which used to be a thing, but sadly is no longer a thing anymore. He also did board games for some of the web comics that this company was putting out. And the company was Blind Ferret Entertainment, and he was Ryan Costello. He actually is pretty well known for doing like RPGs with Renegade and Pathfinder. So we kind of became friends while doing somewhat of a business relationship of, hey, I worked for Fujifilm Graphic Systems. I was actually managing the tech center that had those like $1 million printers that actually get used to print board games. So funny enough, my LinkedIn profile looking back was like I was leveling up for the career I was eventually going to find that I didn't know existed. So I do their booth graphics in exchange for going to Gen Con. I go there and I immediately am inspired. And I'm like, I'm going to learn how to be a game designer. I started joining a bunch of groups, had some gatekeeping I had to get through, unfortunately, being a woman. But thankfully, designers have typically been nice. Hobbyists have been the ones that have been more gatekeepy towards me, at least in the beginning. Less so now due to the fact that I can talk about like heavy multiple hour Euro games. I think that gives me somehow credit, which I find ridiculous because who cares what kind of games you play? We can all be gamers. But yeah, so kind of did that. I got my first like game signed in 2020 thanks to a game design like speed pitching event that was digital due to COVID. And so I like pitched a game, got it signed. That game has still not come out though. And I'm about to hit 10 games this year for published in like 3 years of being
Congratulations.
like full-time. So yeah, I've been an energized little toddler apparently from everyone else describing me.
Yeah, that I'm glad you mentioned the gatekeeping aspect as a designer. And one, I'm sorry that you experienced that. And two, it's just not something that I'm conscious of all the time because our Discord is so positive and so engaging, and I think our approach is all are welcome at the table, right? And whether we're running our after school program, everybody's welcome to be who they are on that day when they walk in, right?
Yeah.
And so that's just it's not something I'm always conscious of. It's interesting that you said that 10 published games in 3 years. Did I hear that right?
Yeah. So in 2021 was my first game that came out.
That's unbelievable. And I know we're going to talk about some of those games, but I'm wondering if you can talk to us about what's it like to collaborate on a game like you did with Scott Brady versus designing a game all by yourself as a designer. Can you talk to us about that?
Totally, yeah. So of the games that I have out, slightly more of them are solo than co-design, but each co-design relationship has been very different. So like even think of a romantic relationship, like every partner brings something different to the table. Some people are a little more like straightforward and like, I really like you, I want to work with you, versus like it naturally happens. Like we start as friends and then we come together to make a beautiful game. But with something like Scott and Caution Signs, our game that most recently released in June, that happened because I met him at the PAX Unplugged that Boop first had its appearance at. And so I just happened to be at the Smirk and Dagger booth because I knew Kurt and I was trying to like pitch him a game. And I saw this like adorable game with cats on a bed and the box was like turned upside down. I was like, ooh, what's this? And the woman who was like showing it, is just like, oh, this is Boop, and that's the designer. And Scott comes up and he's like, hey, and like shakes my hand, very professional. We start talking. I was like, sold. I'm buying it. I'm having you sign it because I saw him with a little marker. And I was like, through our discussion, I find out he also created Hues and Cues.
Yes.
And had a printing background. And I, because of Fujifilm, also had a printing background, as well as my first job being in the industry was for a manufacturer. So I go, hey, be on my podcast, because I had a podcast called Game Design Unboxed, Inspiration Publication. I got him on there pretty quickly. And before and after the episode was like recorded, we just like came to realize we had a lot in common for like being from very kind of different backgrounds, different like age and just like that. But like we clicked really well. So he later reached out to me and was like, hey, I'm working on this idea. I think you'd be a good co-designer for it. That game never went anywhere, but because we were already talking and we were both on mutual vacations at the same time, I was in Hawaii, he was in Alaska, I was seeing weird caution signs, he was seeing weird caution signs, and then I was like, what do you think about making a party game, like with drawing in this? And he's like, yes. So we came back, hopped on a call, created a word list. I did my toddler zoomies, did a crazy amount of playtesting, and like 2.5 weeks later, we brought it to Gen Con and got it signed. So that kind of just happened very, very quickly. Him and I did not have the same relationship as I did with like Her Story's co-designers. That was Emerson Masucci and then Nick Bentley. I just saw Emerson in person and like had a real conversation with him for the first time last week at Grand Con.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the reason for that is he started the project of Her Story. Then it went him and Nick. Then it was just Nick. And then it was Nick and I. So it was like this weird kind of relay race of how we designed. And when I was designing with Nick, it was competitive and not collaborative, which is a very weird thing to say about a co-design.
Yeah.
But what we did was we would split test. So we would have the same group of people play his version and my version next to each other, back to back. And then we would talk about it. I would make all the changes and then we come back the next night. So we did that every night and we play tested it like 13 times a week, presenting the best one at the end of the week. And so it was always like us trying to beat each other versus like, let's work together.
Yeah.
It was very interesting and super different from like me and Scott jumping on and like building a word list together and like doing our separate tests and me being like, this is the perfect time. And him coming with like his Gen Con prototype, which was actually the two signs kind of cut in half, like the graphic appearance of it came from his mind. And like we actually, when it got signed, we're like, we should still do this, but like update the graphics, make it look a little nicer. So like very different feelings on the co-design. I've also had it where my co-designer was like, hey, I came up with this idea, but I'm the one who like implemented everything and like created all the words and whatever. So it's like everyone has been so different, where when it's a solo design, I'm doing everything myself. Like the only feedback I'm getting is from my playtesters. And so sometimes it's like nice with a solo because like you get to make your own decisions. You don't necessarily have like two clashing minds with like two different point of views. Like Scott and I are actually working on another co-design right now, but it's a longer process. It wasn't like we made it real quick and it got signed. Now we barely work together, because I developed all of Caution Signs because it was my company that ended up signing it with Wise Wizard kicking it off as Wacky. So it was like a weird, like we 50-50 together, but I took it the rest of the way because that was my day job.
And is there any exclusive news that you wanted to break here on the Game Schooler podcast with that next project?
Wish I could say
no,
that.
no, you're a podcaster, so I was just teasing you with that one. So there's a lot. In the last 4 minutes, I have about 18 questions now that I did not come in. So you that is just an awesome and profound answer. And I'd never thought about the collaborative versus the competitive and with the game design.
I feel like
even Scott and I are kind of doing that right now, because he wanted a competitive version of our party game. I wanted cooperative, but then I proved that cooperative was the right move, so we pivoted that way. So it's like it really is a relationship. Like you fight back and forth, but something better will come for it.
It's funny that you say that about her story, because I feel like I can feel that in the design in the best possible way. Like that, I feel like so many kinks were developed out of that you can see that game went through all of that process, as opposed to, Michael and I play a lot of games, and after you get done playing a game, you're like, oh, maybe this shouldn't have been in there, or I wish that extra thing wasn't added on there. And I think after we played her story, it was like, I got nothing. Like, there's nothing else that needs to be added or taken away. It fits perfectly in the, it's like, this is a parking space exactly designed for that game. So good job on that. And it is interesting to see and hear all of the different ways that can manifest itself.
And listeners can go all the way back to November of 2022 with episode 95 if you want to hear more about her story. It's a game that 2 years ago arrived at Doug's house, and there was, I think, like a 6 or 7 week embargo on it. So for the next 6 or 7 weeks, we just played it, and I took it home and played it with my family and with different play groups, and Doug played it with his extended family, and just a phenomenal game. And each of us have 3 daughters, and it's a game that we've talked about, we've gushed about the art and the history of the cards and how everything fits together is just fantastic.
Oh my God, that was also super weird. I didn't get to see the content and the art until the very end of designing that game. Like, we were doing it separate, and our prototype was so ugly because
that has to be terrifying, Danielle.
It was weird.
Because I can't imagine that.
What if it fell into the wrong hands?
So, Nick has a strong rule that, like, you need to have ugly prototypes, so that way it's the mechanics and the gameplay that shines, where my prototypes in general are typically fairly nice, because I am a graphic designer. Like, graphic design and psychology is what I went to school for. So it's like, even my crappy prototypes are a lot nicer than most designers' prototypes. So that was a very interesting moment when I pulled together everything to build our like next prototype, and I actually had all the artwork with all these like amazing women, and I was like, what? Wow, this looks so good. I was like, this game's awesome. But also I felt kind of like ashamed that I didn't know like half of the women in the game. So that was very interesting, because they had a different team working on the content while we were working on the design for the game.
Oh.
Yeah. So like when I got hired on, they had picked almost everyone who ended up in the game. It was something that in my interviews to become the designer of her story, I was privy to like some of the initial artwork and the direction they were moving, as well as like a huge spreadsheet of all the women they considered for the game and like what they had narrowed it down to and why they had narrowed it down, because I wasn't interested in working on a game about women and if it was all like American women from like the past 100 years or whatever that were like white or something. Like I wanted diversity, and when they showed me how they made it, I was like, yeah, I want to work on this project, and I really pushed for it, and they hired me, so that was cool.
You mentioned, and I might be going someplace I don't intend to, but I'm a huge fan of that game. Doug is. I've bought 4 copies. I bought them for, my goddaughters, my nieces. I've put that game into multiple homes. How did the hobby part of the sector take to that game? How did it do? I guess is the question I'm asking. I've been very curious about that over the last year. And is there more her story coming? So one of those is a very curious, broad, quasi-journalistic question. The other is purely 100% selfish for me.
Yeah. So it's been really interesting because Nick dives into like BGG. He was a neuroscientist, and that's how he thinks we are very different humans. And so I think that's what made the game so good, is because we were very different personalities and very different design sensibilities kind of meshed together. And Emerson was more like Nick. I was very much the opposite. But in the reviews, a lot of people loved the simplicity of it because it was very approachable as like an entryway game. And like even Jamie Stagmeyer said that it was basically Splendor Plus. Like, this is your step to get your like family into games. It's like, here you play Splendor, then you play our game, and then you play Wingspan. So it's like, here's the progression. And so the goal was to make a game like that, to make something that was as accessible as possible. I wanted it to be something that my family would play, because my family at the time, not so much gamers. My sister's getting a little closer. Like I'm getting her there through mostly nature themed games because her and her boyfriend like nature. But we did a great job accomplishing that task. But due to hobby gamers, a lot of them being like, I want super crunch. Like, some of them were like, it's not enough crunch for me. But also, for the audience it was intended for, it hit it on the mark. So it's like, for those people, it has been reviewed very well. For hobbyists, we have found one thing that came up in a lot of comments, and I realized very quickly what the problem was. They didn't shuffle the deck. So a lot of people played with just the blank cards that didn't have the engine building or like the symbols or anything. So like, they just didn't shuffle the deck, and then they thought it was just a set collection game. And we were like,
Doug
what?
usually blames me for that when he gets repeated cards, especially if he's playing at my house. Oh, you didn't; these weren't shuffled. So it happens.
It totally happens. And I was like, oh my god, a simple thing we could have done is just had the factory pre-shuffle, or like when we sent them the graphics, had them out of order, because they're in order how we like did it graphically. So it's like all the blanks are together, all the symbols were together. You don't shuffle, you literally just take it out and play it. If you play with the wrong piece of it, it's a set collection game with
that's
no...
hobby gamers that are taking that out and not shuffling.
Blows my mind.
That's totally an externality, though. You can't plan for that.
No,
I know, but it's like such a weird thing that you don't think about until later.
The irony is that the same people that don't read the rules and don't shuffle it are the ones that are going to tell you it's not crunchy enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah, that's the problem. Yeah. People who are only going to play it 1 to 3 times and then move on from it.
Exactly.
Sorry, Danielle. Things you have to deal with.
And snarkiness in the hobby just drives me
It's
nuts.
super funny. And like how weight-wise, they rated it very low on the rating, which is great, but they like kind of did it too low to begin with. So people thought it would be like easier than like a Splendor. And I was like, okay, there is technically text reading. Like, we tried to keep it to a specific character count. We tried to like have a certain amount where they're blank, because if you're playing with someone who can't read as well because maybe they're a kid or like not of the language that it is printed in, it was going to be so like, okay, so you can just do the symbol-based powers and the like non-ones. You can also do it so it's not as much of a cognitive load to like read everything. So we were trying to do it for accessibility, including just like how the boards, you take the tokens and you place it on. So it's like everyone can see that. That makes it more accessible to younger ages, but also people who maybe can't hold things as much. Because like, I had an aunt who had a stroke, and after that, she couldn't really play card games. It was very difficult for her to hold cards for long periods of time. And so like, we intentionally made that accessible. And so her story did like so many things that hit the mark in a lot of ways that people didn't even realize. And I'm glad that you guys love it so much. Like, when I met you and you told me that, that's why I wanted to be on your show. Because it's like, oh my God, you see the vision, you see what we did. But if we were to do like a second version, I guess we probably would have to change it to make it more to appeal to the hobby market.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, like, this theme is just not something that like non-gamers are like, I want to play a game about women and about writing a book.
I disagree, actually. I feel like there's a disconnect between the hobby and what real world everyday gamers are. And Michael and I went to a thing a couple years ago at a local game store here when we were demoing point salad all day long.
Love point salad.
And Similo.
Mm-hmm.
And
also love Similo.
And so we got, you get the looks from the heavy gamers of why are these guys teaching these light games. And we kind of made a point, kind of a little study for ourselves of, we're going to ask people when they come to the table what new games they're playing, kind of as like market research podcast stuff. And everybody said games that were from 2.5 years ago, a year ago. Things it's like nobody said anything that was Board Game Geek hot.
No,
like
the
that
average
never,
was 5+ years.
That never came up. And the amount of people that are playing games that are not gamers is way bigger. And the idea that everybody is, in order to be in the hobby, you need to be a heavy gamer is just not true.
No.
And in fact, there are so many more casual gamers that are not on Board Game Geek ever that I feel like the way that trekking through the national parks just got into Target, like her story into Target is a better market probably than catering more towards hobby, in my opinion.
So I also agree. I have different opinions than Nick does because we are two different humans. I think it did a great job at what it did. If we were to reprint, there's like little minor things like having a 50+ token or like printed on the bottom of the push pin so it flips over or whatever. Like little things like that are more manufacturing. Or, I mean, maybe we could have put a few more difficult powers and a little less of the blank cards. I think that's totally fair. But yeah, we have different opinions on what we would do if there was like a second version of the game. I think if they were to do it, because of just looking at the Trekking the World second edition, which I still think should have not been a second edition, should have been its own separate game, like a spiritual successor. That one is way more hobby than the original, where the original is based more in like the trekking the national parks realm of like that should be in Target. But it's been really interesting. So, because I no longer work for Underdog Games, I got hired to do her story. Then they hired me full time to work on their like National Geographic games, and then I no longer work there in general. But I do work on some projects with them still. So it's like we still have a good working relationship. I just don't always agree with some of their decisions.
The hobby's so small. You have to, right?
I mean, it was like not because of anything bad. It was just they expanded too fast and then they had to shrink again. It's an issue we have with a lot of smaller companies and like hobby-based companies. So
we see it all the time. And on that, we noticed something at the White Wizard booth at Gen Con, Wacky Wizard.
You mean Wise Wizard?
Wise
Wizard
Wizard booth.
White, then it's Wise, and now there's Wacky the imprint.
Wacky, yeah. So tell us about
there.
What's going on with Wacky Wizard, and what are you bringing to the company there, Danielle?
Sure, yeah. So I originally was hired after Underdog to move over to Wise Wizard Games. I started as their project manager, but then because little did I know, I was allowed to design outside of my job because what I design is not necessarily what Wise Wizard makes until like they saw caution signs and they wanted it. And then told me that they had been thinking about making an imprint for quite some time, and they already had like a game in the works and another one that got signed that would have made more sense as an imprint. So what we did is we took those 3 games and had those be our first like releases. So Caution Signs was the first game. Then we had Star Realms Academy that just came out at Gen Con. And then the follow-up, which is actually currently on my desk because I was reviewing it earlier, is going to be Pack the Essentials.
Oh,
Kitties.
Cool.
Yes. And so I became the project director of Wacky Wizard Games, and now I'm actually the project director of all our games. So
And what does that
up.
mean, project director?
So what it meant is I launched the new imprint. I was the one doing inventor relations, so talking to designers about signing future games. I was developing all the games. So it's like once we had the design, I was helping finish it up, tighten up the rule books, work with the graphic designers, illustrators, project managing all of that, and then writing up the specs. So like figuring out what materials we wanted everything to be, like the sizes we wanted stuff to go, and work with the factories, pick one out once we figured out a quote that looked good to us. And then working once we figured that out to like actually proceed forward. Like that was a pre-pressed sample. It got approved. Now we're moving into mass production. So that way it'll come out this year. So I'm kind of doing a little bit of everything. And then I will be at conventions, meeting content creators or whatever, and going on video and showing off games or demoing, doing whatever is asked of me, basically. Small company
That's
vibes.
awesome.
Yeah.
Those are the best company vibes.
They are, yeah. And that, the level of engagement that you're able to have with consumers and even just random folks like Doug and I mean, we were able to play Caution Signs with you at Gen Con, you know, and then right away turn around and play that in our own homes with our own spouses and family and friends. And I just think that's something that you really brought to that company. That's awesome. It's awesome. And we like to celebrate that. So
Thanks.
And there's still disputes from that original demo of Caution Signs.
You mean where I drew a pregnant astronaut? You're not
pregnant.
going. It was. I know what I drew. I know what I drew.
Well, then it was the worst drawing in the world.
Well, I'm not disputing that. Okay. I want to shift gears though and just throw another little praise, if that's okay, but to your podcast that you've been doing and I've been a fan of and been listening to. Game Design Unboxed, comes out, I believe, every other week. Do I have that right? I feel like, and that was, I probably should have researched that before coming in, but and you do such a great job of really getting under the hood of games, and so many of the games have been in my house at one point or time, in and out of my collection, and so I just talk to our listeners about what you do over at Game Design Unboxed.
Yeah, so I started that podcast back in 2020 with actually 2 co-hosts at the time, but then now it's just me because scheduling is a lot easier with one person.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and also way easier to edit when you have less guests/hosts. But the goal of that one at the time was I just wanted to learn more about games. And I love the Food Network show Unwrapped, where they just took like a Jolly Rancher and you figure out how it got made and produced and stuff. Yeah, so I was like, I want to do that, except with board games, and like talk to these designers who I probably wouldn't have had access to, because like I've had some really big names. I'm about to hit 100 episodes.
You've had huge names on the show.
Yeah, I have been very lucky, and that has been partially through meeting people at conventions, or like a guest being on my show, enjoying my company, and they like knowing someone and then introducing me. So like I had Emerson on my show before I met him, kind of through email for her stories. So like he was on there for the Century Games. And then my 100th episode is going to be Phil Walker Harding, so I'm super excited. We're going to talk Sushi Go and all of that fun things that have come out of it, especially since they're about to hit 10, or they did hit 10 years, and they had their 10-year edition coming out. So, but yeah, so the goal was partially like my ability to network, grow, also as a new designer. When you talk to publishers, they normally just kind of shoot you off, but when you have a card and a show, you're also like a media thing where they can get free media. So they wouldn't throw my card away anymore. They would just pass it off to their designer or whatever game that they publish. And so I get to talk to some cool people, and also just plugging their brain helped me become a better designer. It also made me feel like, oh, I do similar things, or like, oh, I've never tried something like that. And so a lot of my conversations could feel more organic because I like was trying to learn more about these games that either I have played or maybe I haven't, but people are fans of, and like they're either mechanics that I haven't explored or I have. And so like I'm sure my interviewing style has changed. I definitely prep a lot less now because I'm way more familiar with design and I play a lot more games. So yeah, I mean, it was just a way for me to like help people learn about their favorite games, but also help me become a better designer at the same time.
Yeah, it's a great show, and I'll drop a link of it into our Discord here for our listeners. I'll also put it out on X in my Tuesday follow-up post that I make. It's awesome, and you've had tremendous designers on there. I think the first time, and it's just funny how some of those things happen, right? Like I can remember listening to your show about Fossilis and then going over to Doug's house and in his basement in headquarters, game school or headquarters, he's like, hey, I've got this game I've been wanting to play. It's called Fossilis. And I'm like, yeah, let's sit down and play. And so it's just one of those pieces. It's great to have you on the Game Schooler podcast, but we love to celebrate all podcasts in the hobby. And so that's
and
one
awesome
that
people.
And yes, and so great work over there, and just love the deep dive, and you do a wonderful job. You and your co-host do with just interviewing designers. You really do hear the story of the game and some of the underpinnings of the design that are guiding their work. So
honestly,
keep it up.
I also just love that it's not always just about the design, but about like the story of what inspired them. So. Mm-hmm. And even just sometimes, like, we get deep. Like, we'll have, like, someone had a mental breakdown or a divorce or just, like, I was like, oh, my God, are you okay? Do you need me to cut this out? And they're like, no, because, like, this is what made the games they are.
Part of the story.
It's part of the story, yeah. And so it's been really cool to see some of my guests get, like, actually vulnerable and share those kinds of things.
Well, and I think from the designer standpoint, the thing that Board Game Geek misses so often is... it's that I played the game and now I know everything about it, and to be able to then have the designer say, well, actually, in playtesting, we did try your idea, and it was a disaster.
All the time.
Yeah, that type of stuff where it's like, no, the game actually doesn't work that way. And so I like to hear that element of, well, this is why we made the choice, because it seems like in anything in life, there always seems to be this idea that people are just randomly making decisions of whatever I want to do, and it's like usually there's a little bit more thought behind some of the choices that are being made for whatever region.
One of the main things that people say about her story, they're like, I wish the library card could, like, get rid of the chapter cards, like, on the main board and stuff. And so we tested that, and it was terrible because so many people were
clear
like,
the queue.
Yeah, they're clearing the queue, exactly. So it's like someone could be working towards it because you don't have to reserve your card by drafting first. I know a lot of people misunderstand the rules, or they just, like, automatically do that, or through, like, teaching it. It just seems like, oh no, you do that because you get rewarded 2 points when you do it. But really, we kind of mathed it out, and it's about like 2.5 points per turn you could potentially be earning. And so that's why we give people 2 points, so it feels like less bad, kind of like Splendor gives you the, like, kind of gold token.
Yeah, the wild.
Yeah, the wild, exactly. So it's like you're getting something because you're basically wasting a turn to reserve that and stuff. And so we have a lot of people who are like, oh, but I don't like these. And it's like, okay, but you can still clear the other stuff. And it's like someone's going to take them and something new is going to come out. But yeah, so that was like one interesting thing that we're like, no, we tested the crap out of it. And most people hated it when we did the split testing.
Well, now you know, too. You can just tell them, shuffle the cards next time. You'll enjoy it a lot more.
Yep.
Oh,
well, thank you so
great.
much for spending some time with us. We love to celebrate awesome people and awesome things in the hobby, and then and try and stay away from the negativity. We want to wish you a happy birthday. Apparently, the day that this episode is airing, although it's not recorded today, we don't have that fast of a turnaround. So happy birthday to you.
And in between time, we understand you've also published 2 more games. So congratulations. You're up to 12 games instead of 10.
Shoosh. So. I'm not that fast. That's pretty funny, though. Oh, my God. No, I cannot wait for all the cool stuff I have coming out.
All right. Well, keep us posted when they do. And where's the best places to find you?
Best places to find me, you can follow me on Instagram, X, Blue Sky under Token Gamer, and that's Gaymer. You can also follow my website. It's dmrcreativegroup.com. I am getting a little bit better at updating that and showing, like, the projects that I have published and the ones that are coming out. So if you want to, like, see what I am and what I've been doing. Also, Board Game Geek, just, like, type in Danielle Reynolds and you'll get all my info. But yeah, and especially for the people that listen to your podcasts, you'd be most interested in probably my games that are with Underdog, because I still have Secret Clue Animals, came out last year. The second one is coming out, which is Secret Clue Cuisines. It is my first game that is built on a system that is going to be carried through. I'm currently playtesting various other forms of, like, what that game is going to look like in the future, so different themes. And you guys know that all the Underdog games on the back of the cards, you're always learning something. So if you like animals, definitely buy the animal one. It is a 15-minute, like, co-op deduction game. And then the next one is going to be, like, cuisine. So it's like food from around the world. It is not a game to play on an empty stomach because those pictures are really tasty looking. But highly recommend checking out those. And if you have a small kid, there's also a scavenger hunt in there that's also animal based. So it's got some cute little fun facts on the back of the cards.
So make kids play that while supper's being prepared, right? Just, no, you can wait. Go play the game.
Yep. Only 15 minutes. I mean, it's been clocking at 15 minutes for a long time. So
that's awesome.
It's great.
And then go ahead and check out, if you're listening to our show, definitely go ahead and check out Game Design Unboxed as well if you want to. And if this is the first time you're hearing about it, you've got a back catalog of almost 100 episodes to go check out. So great work on that show.
Thank you. I also want to plug, I have another podcast that just started this year, and that is Proud to Game, and that's Gayme. And so kind of similar-ish to what I did with Game Design Unboxed. Instead, every episode, which is only monthly, so less to commit to, but it's focusing on, like, different individuals or like groups that are doing cool stuff in like the LGBTQ plus space. So whether they're a designer or nonprofit, just kind of taking a deep dive on like, how did they realize they were gay? How does that affect them as a gamer? And also like, what are they doing? Are they like painting minis? Are they like throwing parties? What are they doing? But kind of a fun way to like give back and show more visibility in that space, because I really try to use as much of my free time to help support women and like LGBTQ plus individuals, because I'm a lesbian game designer and there's not a lot of us. And the more of us are like doing things like this, the more of us are going to like come into the hobby and feel welcome. I'm the anti-gatekeeper. I'm going to just be a keeper.
I like that.
Keep it open.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Danielle. Thanks for joining the Game Schooler podcast. This has been great.
Yeah, this has been awesome, guys.
If you're anything like us, you're constantly on the hunt for new games to try out. This week, Michael and I are going to be sharing our high 5 favorite worker placement types, which is an interesting list. Worker placement is where you are putting a piece out on the board and then taking a corresponding action. Board Game Geek lists 3 different types of worker placement. I've got 5. I don't know about you, Michael. Do you get a full list?
Yeah, I do. I have 5. There could be some crossover. This could be a different type of list. We'll dance around it how we want to dance around it. But my first, number 5, am I good to just jump in?
Jump in.
I've got worker placement. Less is more. Pure. All right, I'm going to go Board Game Geek style, because Board Game Geek puts a comma, so it's when they add on a category. So I created my own. Number 5, less is more, comma, pure worker placement, Lords of Waterdeep. Just putting out a worker, blocking out a spot. This was recently inducted into the Dice Tower Hall of Fame, 2012-ish. I don't have the stats up right in front of me, but just an awesome game set in Waterdeep, which is in the Dungeons & Dragons universe. Doug introduced this game to my kiddo and I, and we played a 3-player game, and it was awesome. And the thing about that, when you place a worker out, that's your spot. It is, you have blocked it out by dedicating your worker there. So less is more, pure worker placement, number 5 for me, and Lords of Waterdeep.
All right, good choice. My number 5 is worker placement with powers. So this is the idea of different workers have different abilities or bonuses. So the game that I picked out for this is Santa's Workshop 2nd Edition, in which you have different elves, and those elves may be better at some tasks than others. And if you can happen to put them in the right place, you get a bonus as opposed to spending them somewhere else. And there's not a bunch of games that I can think of that have this. I do like it, especially if there's an easy way to keep track of it. There are some games that use it with, if you put this color worker over here, you might get an extra bonus, or these workers always get this, that type of thing. But Santa's Workshop 2nd Edition, we talked about in episode 152, is a great example of that type of worker placement. One that I'm surprised there's not more of. So that's my number 5, worker placement with powers.
Awesome. And one that Doug so clearly eviscerated Rio Grande Games in the review that we can't get anyone from the company to talk to us, Doug. So that's how good of a job Elf Creek did with that one. Just put that again. What did you call it? You said worker placement with powers?
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Awesome. Number 4 for me, if number 5 was less is more, number 4, more is more. Majority workers wins the spot. And for this, I think you probably know where I'm going. I'm referring back to a game of the week in episode 122, and that is Stone Age, which was published in 2008 by Bernd Brunhofer and art by Michael Menzel. And what's awesome about Stone Age is you're kind of just throwing down people, and when you get the most people, then you win that resource. Doug's played the game a lot more than me. Maybe you're shaking your head. What'd I mess up?
I will talk about it later, but
talk about it now, unless I took like your number 1 or something.
No, you didn't. But in that game, it's not nobody. If you put your space down there, you put more workers there, you have a better shot of getting
winning
more
at
research.
the end of the round.
But you don't block other people out of it.
No, but more is more. The more workers you get there, the better chance you have of winning the spot.
But you don't win the spot. Like if I go and I put 4 guys in the gold mine, I have a better chance of getting more gold, but I don't win the spot. You still get to get gold there.
completely remembered that wrong. Problem when you play too many games and they start running together. So if I put down 4 workers and you put down 6, I'm still going to get a proportion of gold based on the number of workers I put down.
Depending on how your dice roll, and there may only be, like in the forest or hunting, everybody can go there. There might only be 2 spots for the gold. So
All
it
right.
doesn't mean everybody can go there, but
So
the
then
more
I'm going
workers
to
that you
amend
put
this
there.
so that you don't have to clean up my work, my edit later. Number 4, more is more.
Yes.
Majority workers wins more stuff.
There you go.
There
That's
we
all
go.
right.
Now it ties out and we're good and we can keep moving. What do you have it for, Doug?
Something actually similar, which is stacking workers. And this shows up in a game called Architects of the West Kingdom. And it's a lot of worker placement games start where you have like 3 workers, and maybe you can get a 4th or a 5th as the game goes on. Architects of the West Kingdom says, you got 20 workers or whatever number it is right from the start. Use them how you want to do them. But the cool thing about this is as you add them to a space, your action becomes more powerful. So first time I put a worker there, I get 1 action. If I put another worker there, that action becomes more powerful. And I get a 3rd or a 4th, stronger yet, to the point where then there are actions where Michael can say, Doug, that's getting a little bit too powerful. I need to report you to the authorities, and some of those guys are going to prison because you're obviously manipulating the system. And so I can't think of another game that does this, but that idea of like, here's all of them. You can't get more of them. Once they're on the board, you're going to have to start pulling some back. But those actions don't get juicy until you start putting a whole bunch of guys out there, and then you're drawing the attention of everybody else. So kind of balancing that of how close can I get to the sun without melting is my number 4, stacking workers.
Well played, Sisyphus. Good. Number 3 for me is worker placement leading to
That would be
combat.
Icarus, by the way.
I got you. I know. I was moving on there. Worker placement leading to combat. So, King of Tokyo is the example that I'm thinking of where I put my character leads to follow-up actions, and I can't quite control what other people are going to do, but I know that if I put my character at a certain spot, I'm now vulnerable, and typically that vulnerable will play out in some sort of combat with dice chucking or other things like that. And I enjoy games that lead to that. So that's my number 3.
And do you have an example of that? Or
King of
just...
Tokyo.
Oh, sorry. Did you say that? And I'm
Yes.
just zoned out? Gotcha.
Yes.
Sorry.
The sound of my voice, Doug. It's like the Calm app, but in the middle of the day for you.
Breathe. My number 3 is place a worker, take a worker. And that is represented in Raiders of the North Sea and Coldwater Crown, in which you are placing 1 worker out, and you get the action of where you place it, and you pull 1 worker back, and you get the action from where you pulled it from. I think it's a really cool mechanism. You only have to keep track of your 2 workers. Sometimes it can become a little bit of an order of operations thing where you really want, certainly in Coldwater Crown, it's like I really want the action of my removal first, but you can't do that until you place your 1 first, place 1 out. And so that kind of order sometimes is like, ooh, I really want that one, but the space is blocked and I can use that. And so I really like that tension. Place a worker, take a worker. Raiders of the North Sea, Coldwater Crown. We talked about that in episode 170.
Coldwater Crown we did. Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. My number 2 is dice worker placement. And I have 2 examples for this. One is a light hobby. One is certainly a family, not a family theme, but a family game, and that's Las Vegas. In Las Vegas, you're just placing dice out on a casino and trying to win the chip that's there. It's very simple, and it is pure dice worker placement. And in Creature Comforts, you're putting dice out on the board as workers to try to bring resources back so that you can get more comforts into your little tableau, and then you're chaining other combos. So what I like about dice worker placement is that it really does run the full gambit of everything from kids games to family games to light hobby to hobby. It's a mechanism that can be very simple and then also can take off and be incredible melt your brain fun as well. So that's my number 2 is dice worker placement.
Interesting. Interesting. I would tend to think of Las Vegas as more of an area control.
Oh, sure.
But
I can see that.
I can see the the thing there. My number 2 is straight up worker placement, and I had Stone Age in for my example there, which a lot of times is kind of considered one of the grandfathers of worker placement. We talked about that in 122, and also Lords of Waterdeep as an example of that simple, I'm going to place a thing there, I'm going to take that action. And there are some, usually in worker placement games, there are spots where that's completely blocked off and everybody can go here, for example. That's wide open, but it's usually some sort of weaker action or not that great of an action, where some of the more powerful ones, like in Stone Age, in order to get another worker to place out, you have to put 2 workers in a spot, and then you'll get another worker at the end of the round, which then, of course, you have to feed. So pros and cons. But just straight up worker placement, something I really enjoy. That's my number 2.
Awesome. Yeah, number 1 for me was your number 5. Could have easily been my number 5, and your number 2 could have been my number 1, because I just love all types of worker placement. But number 1 for me is worker placement leading to abilities. And I think Doug had a better, more succinct, because he's just a wonderful marketer. What did you call it? Powers?
Worker placement with powers?
Worker placement with powers. I called it worker placement leading to abilities. Examples. I have a different Garphill Games example, and that's Wayfarers of the South Tigris. And then Darwin's Journey is another example, and that's almost just like your workers actually have a progression. They level up over time when you bring them back in, if you can successfully actually teach and play that game. So I just love how the workers change over time in certain games, and I think a lot of the Garphill games do that. The game you reference, Architects of the West Kingdom. I'm probably butchering that name.
Santa's Workshop.
Santa's Workshop is what you reference. But what's the one where you send them to jail? I love that game.
Oh,
Absolutely.
Architects. Yeah,
Architects of the West Kingdom. And a different game in that line that I've played most recently is Wayfarers of the South Tigris, which you have different, your workers have different abilities, and you're sending them out, and you have very limited paths that you can go along and to get more bonuses as you're moving them across the board. So I really do enjoy worker placement that leads to abilities or powers.
Awesome. My number 1 is one I thought might be your number 1 when I didn't hear you talking about it, and that's dice placement, dice worker placement. For my examples, I have the Voyages of Marco Polo and the Artemis Project. And what I really like about dice worker placement is the idea of rolling dice and how a designer uses high and low value rolls, and the way that can make a difference. And for example, in the Artemis Project, a low roll means I get to go first in that action space with my worker, but I'm not going to get as much.
Yeah.
If I put a big die there, I'm going to be going later in the round, and there may not be nothing left. But if there is, I'm going to get a ton. And in Marco Polo, the kind of the power of the action is based on that. And sometimes you do want low. There's an advantage of having low dice, and it's not just that kind of the way that we're trained to think is bigger is better. And of course, I want to roll all 6s. And sometimes in games like that do the dice placement really well, having a whole bunch of 6s isn't good and not beneficial. So I like the way that designers work with that. Castles of Burgundy would be another good example of that as well. Just not as many dice. So those are my favorite worker placement types. Any honorable mentions for you, Michael?
Not for types. I had about 15 games on my list that I wanted to rattle off. Fortunately, you covered a lot of them, and I'm glad. That's the nice thing about how we do our high five. So in that high five, I was also trying to do a frequency count. I think there were 7 games of the week that we just mentioned. I might be off there. I'll have to go back and check that out and do some math. But just a lot. I think I
had 3 on my list.
Yeah, and I had 3 as well, so maybe 6.
Yeah.
Lots of good worker placement games out there.
Awesome. Well, let us know what, not necessarily different types, because I don't know that there's a ton of more variety on top of that.
Well, I bet we missed some. We'd love to hear it. Where should people let us know where we missed it?
At the Game Schooler Discord, gameschooler.com/Discord. Let us know what we missed. And which worker placement games are your favorite? Subscribe to the podcast and follow us on X at GameSchoolerU for both of those. And then I wanted to thank Danielle for taking the time to chat with us today. It was great talking about all things Wise Wizard and Underdog games. So thank you, Danielle. Next week, we're going to be talking about Let's Go to Japan. We're going to be talking to Pat Mooney from Flag Bearer Games, and we're going to be talking about well-designed game boards. Thank you so much for spending the last hour or so with us. We truly appreciate it.
Now get out there and keep gaming.